the United States, when we got our copyright laws, it's all based out of Britain, right? We got a lot of our laws and things from the British. That's just kind of how things were going. Most of the copyright laws in the UK at the time really just were for publishers. And I'm just reciting all of the intro at this point from the book Infringement Nation. And so if you think about it from that context, and they're like, hey, we want content to motivate and inspire people, so we're going to give a limited monopoly. And that way the publishers can protect themselves from having other publishers, because those were the only people. It's not like people had their own printing presses. There were, frankly, elitist then companies that had printing presses, and yeah, it's not so different these days. But anyway, flash forward, now we've got everybody who can print. You can make copies, you can access way more content than could have ever been possibly imaginable before. And people are doing all sorts of stuff with their content. It's not just like making copies. And so the very basis for what content is and how it's used is just very different than what was originally contemplated. There was a lot of questions about, is Disney going to actually let Steamboat Willie lapse and fall into the public domain? And I'm kind of glad it did, honestly. Because if you think about the original intent of content being, hey, we want to give the artist enough time to exploit the content, but then, before you had up to 14 years to exploit it. And then, boom, it was just, public domain, fair use. Not fair use, public domain. So it was accessible. We don't have that now. And there are a lot of ways in which it's just really hard to figure out who owns what stuff and when those copyright terms come up, Usually if we're talking about like pre-1938, then it's more straightforward. But then from like the 40s through the 70s, especially, the 40s through the 80s, no, it's really confusing. And my copyright law professor basically tried to teach us with some tables, and that's what I had to work up. And anytime somebody is like, oh, hey James, this song came out and I want to figure out, is it in the public domain or whatever, then I'm just like, all right, give me like an hour and I'm going to go look at this table. I'm going to try to figure it out. So I'm really happy that Disney didn't try to push, or at least, nothing made any headway. But I still think that artists should be able to fully exploit their work. I think there are a lot of ways that the systems surrounding exploiting your work I think what we had, before, it was just really straightforward in terms of making money and all of that. But I think the industry is flipped. And so in some ways it's really easy to make content and it's really easy to infringe, but it's not easy to enforce it, nor is there really a lot of education about what copyright infringement is. And so, yeah, I mean, just like the nature of the internet has made a lot of cultural norms different, things that would otherwise just be straight copyright infringement. But, I mean, we have memes and stuff. And so this is something that like I said, I'm thinking about. I'm trying to wrap my head around how do we successfully move on? Yeah, so it's the Sonny Bono Act is the last act for the CTA, the Copyright Term Extension Act. That's basically where Disney lobbied aggressively, and they've pushed and pushed. And so, you know, we went from like 14 years to 28, and then it just got up to life of the author plus 75, and then there's like 95 or 120 for corporations. If it's a work made for hire, there's like a whole thing. But yeah, people aren't happy, nobody understands it, and everybody has this concept of fair use of, hey, I can see it, I can access it. And so we kind of get this idea of, okay, but the system, it doesn't really have any safeguards for people to just be on the internet, you know? One of the really entertaining exercises to me, anyway, in the book is to just say, like, worst case scenario, let's go ahead and talk about how much infringement a law professor would be engaging in just in a given day.
It's not a thing about making it accurate.
And so they're like, all right, they're going to wake up. They're going to send some emails. Oh, every single time you send one email, you're going to get a response back. Well, technically, the other person's work could be a literary work, and it's automatically covered by copyright law. And so every single time you send a response, the thread is adding in basically a layer of copyright infringement. And it's kind of taking it to the extreme. No, it is taking it to the extreme. But it's kind of putting a point out there that, like, hey, it's not quite so far-fetched that each of these instances could be treated under current law, depending on your districts and all that. But, like, if somebody really wanted to, then they could file a lawsuit, and it would be really obnoxious. But thankfully, we don't have that. I mean, you do see plenty of people who are pretty aggressively enforcing their rights, and there are trolls out there too. But it's just really hard to add a benefit to rights holders without it also benefiting, you know, Disney's and mega corporations. The only ways to really do that would be to put some kind of bans or like a size or something like that. And so something that I've been thinking about is like, okay, let's just assume that all the services and platforms, you know, Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, we're all going to have content on these platforms for the foreseeable future, until somebody gets sued into oblivion or until a billionaire gets bored and shuts everything down. So those are some of the places where content, are located now. Content is located. And so from those various services and platforms, we've got the DMCA system. Now, that was added after. And, the basic idea with DMCA laws is, hey, service provider, you are going to listen to rights holders whenever they make a claim that their work is being infringed on your site. So they've already got a system. It's not a great system, but it's a system that allows rights holders to get in contact with them. And so what if we just had something similar where there is a portal where rights holders could get registered, kind of like with Google's Content ID or, other music programs that are already out there, Audible Magic for Twitch. And rights holders could just go ahead and say, hey, look, I've got content. If this comes up, then let's split revenue. And so if somebody files a DMCA notice or if something else comes up, then maybe you could do one of two things. One, I don't want to see it there, take it down. Boom, that's current law. You can figure out whether they're going to take it down, whether there's a counter notice, all that business. But you could say, hey, look, this is my content and I'm fine with them, keeping it up. But if they're going to profit from derivative works based on my content, then, I want that ad revenue split. Give me a portion. And so what you could do with that kind of system would be to have different terms for virality. And so let's say, frankly, it's not worthwhile to file a lawsuit until we're like 20K in damages at a minimum. Lawyers' fees and the work that goes into filing these types of lawsuits, just 20 to 50K. Anything below that, it may be worthwhile to send a DMCA notice or to send some kind of letter, but the cost of enforcement for smaller creators, it's just too high. They have sort of tried to work with that for the, I want to say CCB, but I feel like I'm getting it wrong. The Copyright Claims Board, yeah, CCB. And so that's the small claims court of copyright court. There are a lot of boundaries on that part. I think the idea of doing something for smaller creators is cool. If your work is being copied a lot, then you only have a limited number of cases you can file per year with the Copyright Claims Board. It's kind of silly. So everything else you just have to file or send cease and desist or DMCAs outside of the CCB. But yeah, so I was just trying to think about, what could people do that would make sense? And none of the services or platforms are going to want to do any of that stuff.